I will not be bullied by that.
Go to sleep, go to sleep.
Wade from behind takes it away. Chalmers, Cole, James!
You're right. Let's see what you got. Hit me. I'm open.
Hi.
That's why. Now sit down and shut up.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Lake Show. And now, obviously, I'm posting this on a Thursday morning rather than a Tuesday. But obviously, like I mentioned on Tuesday's episode, me and my buddy Ryan, I appreciate you again, brother, for coming on. It was a fun time. I look forward to doing it again sometime. We made our entire NFL Week 1 predictions, season outlooks for the NFL. You know, we just had a great time doing that. And I really hope you guys tune into that episode. It's a very fun episode. And you probably disagree with a lot of picks I make when it comes to who's going to win or lose in the first week of the NFL season. Obviously, tonight we have the Baltimore Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs to kick off the NFL regular season. So it's going to be a fun time. But today we're talking about college football. Now, this isn't going to be your typical 45-minute episode to an hour episode that I like to do. This is just going to be a short recap of college football week 1 and a brief preview of college football week 2. There's a lot that happened on Saturday. A lot of shocking things happened Saturday. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I will say I went 4 for 4 on all those big games that I predicted. Clemson and Georgia, I knew Georgia was going to win that game. That's 1. Miami against Florida, I knew Miami was going to win that game. There's 2 for 2. I predicted Notre Dame would beat Texas A&M in a tough game. They indeed did. And surprisingly, a lot of people weren't picking this game whatsoever. I picked USC to beat LSU. I actually did that. You can check back to last week's episode. I'm going to probably clip that in the beginning of this episode, so we'll see. But I went 4 for 4 on the big games on that Saturday slate. So we're going to dive into a couple things about those games because there's a lot to unpack. We're going to start with Clemson and Georgia. And oh my Lord, did the Dogs, they just marked their territory right all over Clemson. Dabo Sweeney, his time is running out in Clemson. He's an old head. He likes the old-fashioned way of coaching, recruiting, and developing players. Well, nowadays in college football, I don't know why he refuses to use the transfer portal. He refuses to go out and get players. You look at any and all other big-time programs in college football. Alabama uses the transfer portal. Miami utilizes the transfer portal. Even though we'll talk about them soon, Florida State still tries to use it. Georgia uses it. Like Texas uses it. All the big-time programs, Ohio State, the clear winners of the transfer portal over this past offseason. But all these great teams in college football, they all utilize the transfer portal to gather talent to win now. That's what I feel like Dabo Sweeney is missing. Yes, I still partially believe, like, yes, you have to recruit well. You have to develop players well. But in the new age of college football, you have to go out and get players that can make an immediate impact right now. Pretty much all the big transfers in this past offseason in the portal made immediate impacts on their given teams. You see Cam Ward for Miami absolutely light Florida up in the swamp. You see Quinshon Judkins, he showed out again for Ohio State against Akron. So, you got guys all over the country that just want to play and, go to a team that is a better fit for them and maybe possibly even start. I just don't get why Dabo Sweeney refuses to acknowledge the fact that, he's behind the 8-ball in college football. He really is. He's outmatched against nearly every elite coach he's going to go up against. I don't know how I feel about Clemson going forward. I really don't. Georgia bludgeoned them to death 34-3. Georgia clearly still the number one team in college football, and I think they're going to march their way through the SEC this year. So to start off, Georgia beats the brakes off of Clemson 34-3. So obviously I didn't predict this game, but we all kind of knew what would happen is Ohio State and Akron. Ohio State won 52-6. Despite looking very, very sluggish in the first two and a half quarters, give or take. I watched a good portion of that game while I was watching the Miami game. I knew Ohio State would pull away. But it reminds me about early last year when Ohio State played my alma mater, Youngstown State, and they were just sluggish and sloppy to start off that game. Now, eventually they pulled away, I get it. But when you look at Ohio State, are they necessarily the juggernaut that everybody thinks they're to be? Not necessarily. Their defense is otherworldly. I will say that. Their defense, it's up there with Georgia of being probably the best in all of college football. But as far as the offense, Will Howard did good things. Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson did good things. Jeremiah Smith, 6 receptions, 92 yards, and 2 touchdowns. After dropping his first pass in college, Jeremiah Smith is going to be arguably the best wide receiver in college football, and it probably won't even be close. At least, maybe not in his freshman year, but years to come, Jeremiah Smith is going to be, he'll be a first-round draft pick in a couple years in the NFL. 100%. But I will say, I wouldn't say it's time to, panic yet in Ohio State. Not at all, because you guys won 52-6. But when you look at Ohio State as a whole, you start off sluggish against Akron. It's the same thing that happened last year. The offense never really got going, for Ohio State last year, especially with Kyle McCord at quarterback. Like, I talked about Kyle McCord. I beat that dead horse too much now of how I think Will Howard is just a more athletic, more accurate version of Will Howard. But when you looked at last year, there's a reason that Ohio State didn't end up beating Michigan is because their offense lacked, certain firepower and skill at certain key moments in time. They looked very sluggish against Michigan early on. We all watched that game. They've looked very sluggish. But I wouldn't be too concerned about Ohio State. They're still going to ride their way to the Big Ten, but the Big Ten is going to be a lot closer than people think this year. Oregon, number 3 in the nation, playing Idaho. I didn't predict this game, but we all kind of knew what would happen. But I didn't think Oregon would be in a dogfight with Idaho, of all teams. Oregon was hyped up to be the 3rd best country in the nation right now. Yeah, they didn't play like it. So the Ducks have a lot to work on. Dylan Gabriel's still a stud. So we'll see how that progresses later down the line in the season. But, if I'm head coach Dan Lanning, I am deeply, deeply disappointed with how Oregon played. Very sloppy, very sluggish against an Idaho team that really had no business keeping it close with an Oregon team like this. But I digress. So I think going forward, Oregon will be much better. But, week 1 jitters, it happens to a lot of teams in college football. But it's just troublesome. When you see games like that, it's very, very troublesome. Alabama handled business against Western Kentucky. They haven't skipped a beat, 63-0. Then we have another game I predicted. Notre Dame going into Texas A&M, going into Kyle Field, and beating the Aggies. I predicted that. Riley Leonard is a hell of a quarterback, transferred from Duke, went to Notre Dame, and, he's looking to play for a national championship. And for all intents and purposes, Notre Dame will be favored in every game going forward for the rest of the season. It's a cakewalk. They're going to, at minimum, get the 5th seed, and at most, get the 5th seed in the college football playoff. Obviously, the top 4 are reserved for the top 4 rated conference champions. So, obviously, Notre Dame is out of any hope of getting the bye, but they will probably be the 5th overall seed in this year's 12-team playoff. I always said Marcus Freeman was a good coach, and to go into Texas A&M, one of the toughest environments in all of college football, that was impressive. The score may not reflect it, a 23-13 win. Notre Dame's defense is for real. Their secondary is for real. So Notre Dame has a lot, tip of the cap to the Irish. Head coach Marcus Freeman knows what he's doing, and I think the Irish are going to cruise their way to the college football playoff this year. There's one game that is going to give Notre Dame trouble, and it's because I picked them to win against another team, and we're going to talk about them in a few minutes. But the other game I predicted before we get into the last one, Miami going into the Swamp and playing Florida and beating them 41-17. That just it just shows you how impactful Cam Ward truly is to a locker room, to a team, to a culture. He completely outmatched Graham Mertz on the other side. Even when DJ Lagway for Florida came into the game, you could notice the clear talent differential. Graham Mertz, Cam Ward, it's not even a conversation. Cam Ward instantly put himself in the Heisman conversation and is honestly trying to elevate Miami to levels it has not been at since the early 2000s. Since when I was 1 year old, 2 years old. That's the kind of hype that's surrounding Miami now. Now, on the flip side, well, first, Miami, I think they proved to everybody in the nation that they're real. They are for real. A lot of people pictured Florida upsetting Miami. I kind of was nervous about this game just because it's a hated rival. You're going into the Swamp, notoriously one of the toughest places to play in college football. But Miami went in there and absolutely steamrolled the Gators, 41-17. So Miami, they'll probably be favored in every single game going forward for the rest of their season. And, sky's the limit for that team. They have an opportunity to do so many great things this year. And we're going to talk about 2 more games from college football in week 3 more games in college football week 1. Michigan beating Fresno State 30-10. It was not a convincing win. Despite what the final score says, that offense looked sloppy and sluggish. It's quite obvious that offense is not the same as it was in the national championship year and how much talent Michigan has lost to the NFL draft. So, but the defense is legit. Michigan's defense is still 100% legit. They will keep them in every single game this year. But that offense has to get right. Donovan Edwards needs more carries, and that quarterback situation, I always thought Alex Orji would have been the guy, but, they went the other way. So, personally, I think Michigan's going to do okay this year. I don't think they'll make the college football playoff because I do think the Big Ten is just too stacked right now. But, Michigan has hope because of that defense. And the final game we're going to talk about USC against LSU. How about them Trojans? Everybody writing off the Trojans. No Caleb Williams, a terrible defense. You're moving to the Big Ten with Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon and UCLA are following you like you're going to be nothing in the Big Ten. What USC just did to LSU, it wasn't a convincing win, but it was a hard-knocked, earned win for the Trojans. Going toe-to-toe with one of the SEC's best in LSU and beating them straight up at their own game. Question marks that entered the game. Going into the game, there were a lot of big questions. How is Lincoln Riley going to coach? He's been criticized so many times over the past couple years for his coaching, especially when it comes to big games. How would Miller Moss do? You go from Heisman Trophy winner Caleb Williams to Miller Moss. Well, here's what I said to everybody. Miller Moss was going to be fine. Miller Moss is a great quarterback. He threw for over 400 yards in his first career start in the bowl game last year. They may have lost that game, but, he still showed out. And Miller Moss didn't disappoint in this game against LSU. He was slinging the ball left and right all across the field. Same thing with the opposite quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier. I didn't expect him to be that good, but the quarterbacks for LSU and USC both showed out. So I think both teams going forward, they got their guy. They got the quarterback settled. What I was truly impressed with is USC's defense. Now, they played a lot of soft coverage early on in the game. They allowed LSU's receivers just to run willy-nilly, catch everything in sight from Garrett Nussmeier. But when you look at that defense from USC, the pass rush is there. The lockdown corners are there, especially later in the game. They made plays. USC, I think, has a legit defense for the first time in seems like forever. I've never said USC had an elite defense, but they have a pretty good defense right now. So, and at the end of the day, I feel like the better coach and quarterback combo won. And I feel like that's an underrated thing in college football. Now, it's a lot different from the NFL, clearly. It's a lot different than the NFL. But when you look at what Lincoln Riley has done with all quarterbacks that have played under him, he's made them into superstars. And I think Miller Moss is the next great USC quarterback. So USC marched into Vegas and beat LSU 27-20. And that was a desperate win, in my opinion, for USC, because now they put the entire Big Ten on notice. It's all Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon. Oh, it's only these three. Well, Michigan is still scrappy. Michigan's very scrappy. Now you got USC in the mix. There's two more teams. I don't think Ohio State is as surefire number one in the Big Ten anymore. I really don't. You got Wisconsin, who's still scrappy. Iowa actually showed glimmers of an offense this past week. So, I think USC put the entire Big Ten on notice. Final game we're going to talk about from week 1. Good Lord. Florida State losing to Boston College at home 28-13. Here's the thing. I thought Georgia Tech would beat Florida State week 1. I did. Just because I felt like there was still a little bit of a hangover from not making the college football playoff and losing to Georgia by 60 in the Orange Bowl by the Seminoles. But I knew deep down that DJ Uiagalelei, I can't ever pronounce his last name, so I'm just calling him DJU from now on. Wow, I butchered his last name. But DJU coming from Clemson, then going to Oregon State, now to Florida State. The Clemson faithful have said numerous times on social media to all the Florida State fans, he's not good. And DJU is not good. He played absolutely awful. The first 4 drives against Boston College, he went 3 for 10 for 30 yards. Are you kidding me? Missing wide open receivers left and right. It's just like I said after week 1 against Georgia Tech, Florida State cannot push the ball down the field. And this offensive line was so touted and so, so talked about in the highest regards of how they're going to be great. They had 20 rushing yards, I think, 3/4 of the way through this entire game against Boston College, a team that not many people really think are going to be a top team in the ACC. Florida State has too much talent to lose like this. Everybody, in my opinion, I thought Florida State would have won this game. I really did. Okay, you lose week 1 in Ireland, in Dublin. Maybe Georgia Tech was just a team of destiny to win opening day in college football and, amount a great upset. Well, Kyle Robichaux for Boston College ran all over Florida State. He ran roughshod all over Florida State. Thomas Castellanos, quarterback for Boston College, ran all over them, passed all over them. And their pass rush, Boston College pass rush is legit. And they got after DJU. They got after him. Sack, pressure, sack. It didn't matter what Florida State and Mike Norvell decided to throw at them. They couldn't move the football against Boston College. And Boston College just ran buck wild all over them. Florida State is in a world of trouble. Their season's effectively over. They're 0-2 in ACC play. Most likely, after that first loss, they would have been knocked out of the top 10 for sure. Now, they'll be lucky if they stay in the top 25 now. After these past two performances, DJU was probably going to get benched within probably next week or within the next 2 weeks. It wouldn't shock me one bit if DJU gets benched for their backup. Florida State, they're in a world of trouble. This is one of the most pitiful starts for a top 10 team probably ever in college football history. Upsets happen. We get it. Upsets happen. Dublin, a neutral site, even though it wasn't neutral, both Georgia Tech and FSU flew across the pond to Dublin, Ireland to play that game, which great atmosphere again. I loved that game. But upsets happen. Appalachian State beat Michigan years and years and years ago. Middle Tennessee beat Miami 2 years ago. Upsets happen in college football. It's natural. It happens at least once a year. We all get that. But back to back, first of all, you lose to a Georgia Tech team that was last in the ACC in basically rush defense, and they held your team to under 100 yards. And Boston College basically added on to that and completely pushed your entire offensive line and defensive line around all livelong day. Tip of the cap to Boston College, Thomas Castellanos, Kyle Robichaux, and head coach Bill O'Brien. They had them boys ready. Boston College came to play, and they certainly showed out. So that's the week one recap. So some of the key takeaways. Ohio State's going to be in the college football playoff. I still believe in that talented roster, that $20 million roster they got. Georgia is by far the best team in the country still. Clemson, Dabo Sweeney's time is coming to an end in Clemson. Miami may be back. Texas is still great. Florida State is god-awful trash. USC is legit for the Big Ten. And Notre Dame will make the college football playoff. Those are some of the big takeaways I have from college football week one. So now let's preview a little bit of week two. Not so many notable games, but just a few we'll name. 15 Tennessee going to North Carolina State. Grayson McCall and North Carolina State, they looked very shot, very spotty and sluggish their first week. And personally, I think Tennessee is just loaded with talent. I really do. They have the best defensive end in America. And I'm going to take the Volunteers to win probably 41-27. I don't think it's necessarily going to be close. I don't care if it is at NC State. But yeah, I don't see Tennessee losing this game against NC State. So there's one. The big one that nobody's going to talk about. Colorado at Nebraska. Nebraska is going to beat the brakes off of Colorado. Colorado should have lost to North Dakota State. They should have lost. If it wasn't for Travis Hunter being otherworldly and probably the guaranteed Heisman Trophy winner, and then you got Jimmy Horn at the other receiver position, they make Shedeur Sanders look better than he is. I think Shedeur Sanders is easily the most overrated quarterback in all of college football. Oh, he threw for 400 yards and 3 touchdowns and only 1 pick. Yeah, you should do that against an FCS school. Now, granted, it's the best FCS school, give or take, in the past 20 years. But that's teams YSU plays. South Dakota State plays. Even though South Dakota State is way better than North Dakota State right now. But you get what I'm saying. You should be you're an FBS school. You're an FBS school, Division 1A. There's no reason an FCS school should be walking in and taking you to the brink. North Dakota State pretty much controlled the entire line of scrimmage, give or part the first 3 quarters of that game. I think talent just prevailed for Colorado, but that game was way too close. Now going up against Nebraska, Dylan Raiola at quarterback for the Cornhuskers. At Nebraska, terrible place to play. Miami played there a couple years ago. It was a tough place to play. They ended up losing that game, but Nebraska, even though that they are so spotty every single year, it seems like they always lose close games. I think they're about to put Deion Sanders, his sons, and Travis Hunter in their place. I think Nebraska wins by a landslide. Another game we're going to talk about. Appalachian State going to Clemson. App State has an outside chance to be the 12th seed in the playoff. I think they're the best group of 5 team. That's teams who are not in the Power 5 conferences, well, the Power 4 now. But the group of 5 teams, out of every one of them, I would say Boise State, App State, and Liberty have the best chances to make the 12th seed or the 11th seed in the college football playoff. We're about to find out really how good or bad Clemson is this week. because App State's no pushover. They will come to play. They will come prepared. Clemson, Cade Klubnik, Dabo Sweeney, they better show up because I think App State has a legit shot to win this game. I'll take Clemson because their defense is still great. They held Georgia to, I believe it was only 10 points or 6 points. Either way, the entire first half of the Clemson-Georgia game, Clemson's defense is unreal. Clemson's defense is the real deal. Their offense is just a BB gun. And we got one more game we're going to talk about, and it's the big one. Texas Longhorns going to Michigan. This is going to say a lot about both programs. Michigan, their defense is solid, but their offense is spotty. Texas nearly beat Washington to go to the national championship last year. Quinn Ewers is back. They have so much talent on the offense, so much speed on the offense. Their defense is very good. I think Texas walks into Michigan. I think they hand them their first L. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think it'll be like a 28-21 kind of game, 28-24 Texas. Just because they're in the big house, I will take this to be a close game. But to finish off, those are my predictions for week 2. I definitely think Texas is walking into Ann Arbor and beating the Wolverines. It's not going to be a blowout. A lot of people would think so just based off of Michigan's offense, the way they played last week, but I don't think so. I think it's going to be a good game. I think it's going to be a quality matchup. And that's going to wrap it up on today's episode, everybody. I appreciate you making me a part of your day. Like I said, Tuesday's episode is out now. This is dropping, obviously, Thursday morning. Be sure to check this out. Be sure to check Tuesday's episode out, NFL preview of Week 1. And this, obviously, college football Week 1 recap going into Week 2. So be sure to like and subscribe, share with your friends, leave some comments down below. I'm your host, Dominic Lako. God bless.